In previous videos, we learned how to calculate the mean, variance, standard deviation given a set of data. We learned both the population and the sample versions of those. But what we're going to look at now is what happens if instead of all the data, you're not given that, but instead you're given grouped data. So we had an example where we took a bunch of data and we broke it up into classes. And these were the numbers that we had here. I'll just copy things down. So this told us that, for example, there were 5 data points somewhere between 0 and 2, 4 between 2 and 4, and so on. And if I wanted to calculate the average value of these, I can't do it. Because those 5 data values are between 0 and 2. I don't know if it's like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, really small numbers, or if those are numbers like 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, and really close to 2. Both situations would be in the 0-2 range, but I don't know where they're at, which means I can't add them up and get the exact mean. However, we are going to do the best we can, even if it's not perfect. And so what we want to do is I want to pick a number that's going to represent the range 0 to 2, and that's going to be my best guess for what those numbers are. Again, I can't be sure exactly what the numbers are, but I'm going to make a guess here, and we're going to do something called the class midpoint. And if you want to find the class midpoint of, let's say, 0 to 2, you take the lower class value for that, the lowest class limit, which is 0. Then you take the lower class limit for the next class. So the next class is 2 to 4. Lower class limit there is 2. And you average those two numbers. And I'm going to say that my class midpoint, my representative from the class, is 1. And you can see that's directly halfway between 0 and 2. If you repeat this, the class midpoint for 2 to 4 is going to be 3. 4 to 6 is 5. 6 to 8 is 7. 8 to 10 is 9. So those are your class midpoints. We're going to pretend that all of our data values for class 1 are the value 1, and all the data values for class 2 are 3. Again, this is not perfect, but we're going to pretend. Now, what would happen if you were to add up all the data points for the first class? Well, if I'm assuming that all 5 of them are just the number 1, it'd be 1, and then another 1, another 1, another 1. There'd be 5 ones. That's the same as just saying, take the class representative 1, multiply it by how many data points there are 5, and that's what you get if you add them up. Well, what happens if you're going to add up all of them? Right, to find the mean, you have to add up all the data points. Well, the data points from the first class, that's 1 times 5. Data point from the second class is adding the number 3 4 times, because there's 4 data points in there, and we're assuming each one is about 3. For the third one, each one's about 5, and there are 4 of them. And then the next one, each one's about 7, and there are 3 of them. And the last one, each one's about 9, and there are 4 of them. And if I want to say how many total data points are there? Well, there were 5 data points in the first class, and 4 data points in the second class, and 4, and 3, and 4. And if I use my calculator here, I'm going to get a 94 on top over 20 total data points. And so that means my average here is 4.7. Now again, that is not the correct average. If you were to go back and look at all the real data that we used to make this table, if you added all those up and divided by 20, you would probably get a different answer than 4.7. That's okay. This is just the best answer we can get when given this data table. This is how we do it. Now, if you want to think about what we did, there's a way we can write it as a formula. We take our class midpoint, which I'm going to call them xi. We multiply by how many things were in there, the frequency. And then we divide by the total number of data points, that's sum of FIs. That's adding up all the frequencies. So that would be your formula that would tell you your mean for group data. As I've said this many times before, and I'll say it many times again, don't get hung up on the formula here. There's going to be a way in your calculator that you can just modify how to find the mean from just a regular mean to finding a mean in this scenario. Okay, so there's going to be a way that you can put in the data from the table, both columns, into your calculator, and then say find the mean using this group data, using these frequencies, and it will all work out. We can do the same thing for variance and standard deviation. We're not going to even bother to do the calculation of this because they get complicated here. Once again, your calculator is going to do all the work for you. But I'll write down the formula here. So you say, okay, how far is my midpoint from the mean? Square that, multiply by how many are in that class. Then divide by the population size, which is the sum of all the frequencies. And of course, if you want the standard deviation instead of the variance, you have to square root the answer you get. So this right here gives us the population variance and population standard deviation. And if I want the sample variance and sample standard deviation, you're taking how far away your midpoint is from the sample average, multiplying it by the frequencies there. There is one small change in that when you add up all the frequencies, that's your sample size, and we have to subtract 1 from that, like we had the n-1 in the previous formula. Again, don't bother trying to memorize these formulas. I'm just showing you them here for completeness sake, but we will use our calculator to do all the hard calculations for these. Now there is one example that's really important. This is the third one on here called the weighted mean or weighted average. One of the reasons why this is so important is this is how your grade is calculated in my class. It's also how your grade is calculated in probably most of your other classes. Now let me give an example. Let's say, and this is kind of an extreme example, but usually my grade distributions are a little bit more friendly to students than this one would be. But this makes it easier for calculation. I'm going to say homework is worth 10% of your grade. And then let's say you have one midterm worth 40%. And then you have the final that is worth 50%. So let's say that you've been doing a really good job making sure that all your homeworks are turned in on time and complete. And your homework score is 100. You did a perfect job on your homework here. However, let's say that on the day of the midterm, maybe you stayed out late the night before, you didn't get enough sleep, you're not feeling so well, and you come in and you just forget everything during the time and you really bomb it, and you get, say, a 62 on your midterm score. And you realize, oh wow, that's not good. I really need to turn things around here. Let's put in some extra effort. Let's make sure I get enough sleep for the final exam. You really want to be in the class, so let's pull it out, and you're able to get a B on the final. All right, great. I accomplished my goal. Let's see what my overall grade is going to be now. Well, here's how the calculation works. You take the score you have, in this case the homework score, and you multiply it by the weight, how important homework is to your grade. In this case, it's 10%, and we do that in decimal form, 0.1. Then we add the midterm. Your score was 62, and it's worth 40% of your grade, so 62 times 0.4. And then finally, your final 85 times 0.5, and we're going to add up these three things together. This is going to be your overall grade. Now 100 times 0.1 is going to be 10. 62 times 0.4, put that in my calculator, I get 24.8. And then 85 times 0.5, I'm getting 42.5. And if we add these three things up here, 10 plus 24.8 plus 42.5, Turns out the overall grade was a 77.3, so they only got a C, not the B they wanted. And it's because that midterm really brought them down because it was worth 40% of your grade. So even though you did well in the final, you did well in the homework, because the midterm was worth so much and you did so much worse on that, it really dragged your grade down. So this is why it's important whenever you're taking any class, look at the syllabus, look at how much each thing is worth, and then decide, if something's worth a lot to your grade, you need to put in extra time and effort to do well on that. If you do really well in the stuff that doesn't count for much, and you bomb the stuff that does affect your grade a lot, it's not going to help you out in the grand scheme of things. Now, in our formula here, what we were doing is we were taking, again, the value and multiplying it by the weight, kind of like adding up the value times the frequency. And before we had to divide by the frequencies, this time we would divide by the sum of all the weights, and this would give you your weighted average. Now I didn't actually divide by anything here, because if you add up my weights, 10% plus 40% plus 50%, that adds up to 100%, and dividing by 100% doesn't actually change anything. It's just 1. So in this case, I didn't have to do the division. It's no problem there. And that's what you'd have for your weighted average. Now here's something I want to point out, because this is very, it's something you're going to come across when dealing with whatever grading system you may use, like say Canvas or Blackboard, depending on which schools you're taking classes at. And what ends up happening is, let's say it's right before your final exam. So at the time, your final exam has not happened yet. So you don't know you're going to get an 85 on it. Canvas still wants to give you your current grade so you know where you stand in the class. And so as a result here, what you would do is you say, okay, I know the homework and that's worth 10%. I know the midterm and that's worth 40%. And I haven't done the final, so I'm just not going to include that. But now I will divide by how much weight I have used. In this case, I've used 10% and 40% so far. And so let's see, we already knew that it's 10 plus 24.8. And so far 50% of the grade has been determined. And then divide there. And I get a 69.6. So this is what Canvas or Blackboard will do to tell you what your grade is before the end of the semester. They just figure out what has already been done, what you already have a grade for, and then they divide by that total weight, and that's how they get your grade, 69.6 there. So this weighted average formula will work whether you're at the end of the semester and you don't have to divide, or if you're in the middle of the semester, you need to divide by how much you've done so far. And that is really one of the most useful things that you're going to see in this class, because every other class you ever take, that's pretty much how your grade is going to get calculated. And it's important for you to understand that so you know what your Blackboard or Canvas is telling you for your grade and where it's coming from.